It's not a subtopic.
No, it's not a subtopic, I'm just telling you. Okay, we're still on the same subtopic there, okay, so no biggie. Now, an enlisted soldier was one of the green recruits, for example. They were not officers, they were enlisted soldiers. And their pay wasn't really that bad, $13 a month, which really wasn't bad at that time. So the pay wasn't horrible, $13 a month. But their conditions were less than luxurious. They lived in barracks. The barracks had a dirt floor and just one stove in there to keep them warm. And the average population were 60 men in each barracks, so it was a bit crowded. But that was a good thing, and I know this is a new millennium and you guys think differently, but in the wintertime, often it got so cold that these men would actually bunk together to keep warm because it was so cold in those barracks, not really very well built, and dirt floors. So soldiers lived in barracks with a dirt floor and one stove. The average population of barrack was 60 men, and the winter conditions sometimes were so cold that the men bunked together to keep warm. They didn't eat very well either. Here's some typical things they ate at Fort Phil Kearny, and I think Mr. Winkler, I think, treated some of this a few years ago in 8th grade. Hardtack. You remember that? Did he do that for you?
Yeah.
No, it's terrible. Hardtack. It looks like 2 saltine crackers pressed together, hard as a rock. But that was common food, was hardtack, and was common food during the time that we had these Plains Indians conflicts for soldiers. Coffee was a common staple, coffee. And if they were lucky, they had a little bit of brown sugar. A little bit of brown sugar. And if they had any sugar at all, that was like a huge treat. Okay? Not often. So we'll stick with brown sugar. They also fed off of lard, which doesn't sound all that great. And a majority of their food was salt pork, some that had even been left over from the Civil War that the Army had kept. Salt pork. It's hard pork. Not very tasty. Now, because of this poor diet, many soldiers had a serious lack of vitamin C, which led to a condition known as scurvy, which is not good to have. Okay? Led to a condition called scurvy. And that's simply a disease in which you are vitamin deficient. So many of the soldiers had a serious lack of vitamin C because of this poor diet, which resulted in the condition known as scurvy. However, for a period of time, they had a treatment. They were treated, okay? Because sometimes there were freshly baked pies available. And a Negro cook by the name of Black Susan would cook up these pies, and she would sell them kind of under the table for $1 each to the soldiers. And they were more than eager to have one. So they did have a treat on occasion when Negro cook Black Susan would cook up some pies, and then she would sell those pies to the soldiers under the table, so to speak, at a nice profit for herself of $1 per pie. You know, how many soldiers do we have? 450? She couldn't keep enough pies available, frankly. Okay? Well, that ended. Anybody know why?
She died.
No? She got caught by who? Colonel Carrington caught her. And because she was using military flour and military fruit, canned fruit for her pies, he cut it off, and the soldiers lost their treats. Hungry son of a gun. So unfortunately for the soldiers, Colonel Carrington found out that military flour and canned fruit was being used to make these pies, and he stopped the practice.
Why would he stop it? Couldn't he get pies too?
Well, he's not, that's a good point, he's not an enlisted man. If he wanted a pie, by God, he went over and got one. Which takes me to the next discussion, which is the lifestyle of the officers, which was much different. They were fed much better, obviously. And the officers all had nice homes built for them inside Fort Phil Kearny. And of course, who had the nicest home? Carrington had a nice home. And with him, just so you know, with Carrington was his wife Margaret, who we talked about, along with their 2 sons. And Colonel Carrington also had a butler by the name of George that lived with him. So Carrington by far had the nicer house, but they were all a lot better than barracks. And as you can imagine, the food that was fed to the officers and the housing conditions and all were much, much different. Now, what seems kind of weird, why would these soldiers have to put up with eating all that crappy food? What would be outside the fort? All kinds of abundant game, but do you know that Colonel Carrington would not allow his soldiers to hunt outside the walls of the fort? Forbid it. Why, Laramie?
Because
They would be killed, more than likely, no question, because he was afraid they would be killed outside the fort. We'll explain that a little more later. Now, civilians were allowed to go out there. He didn't control the civilians, so if the civilians wanted to go out to hunt, they did. Not many did, though, because they didn't want to be killed. Now, let me kind of explain that to you. If you were exposed outside of Fort Phil Kearny, you were very vulnerable, and the chance of you being killed by Indians was great, was very high. Now, despite the dangers outside the fort, if you were inside the fort, it was very, very safe because the surrounding Indians would not attack a fortified military installation or military unit. Why wouldn't they do that? The walls are only 8 feet high. I can't talk about that yesterday. Why aren't they just going to attack the fort? Because they're going to have heavy casualties. And that was not what they did. Native Americans were not interested in heavy casualties. So they're not going to attack an established fortified military unit. Not going to happen. So as long as the soldiers stayed inside, they were safe. It's when they got outside that became a problem. Okay? Which is going to take us to the story, and this is a new subtopic, the story of Ridgway Glover. We'll see what happened to old Ridgway Glover. Unusual dude. Now, what do you think? He was a civilian or was he a soldier?
civilian.
He was a civilian. And he actually wasn't even from this area. He was born in New Jersey, and he was a Quaker, which is a conservative religious group. And he grew up in New Jersey. And while he was in New Jersey, he developed an incredible interest in this new and exciting technology called photography. Okay? He started paying attention to this new and exciting new technology of photography. He got very, very, very interested in that. And he decided to study that. And after he studied it and got pretty good at it, he wanted to go to the West and photograph the western frontier and the people that inhabited that. That was his goal. Really was excited. He learned about this photography, became pretty good at it. And he said, you know what, I want to go west and photograph this western frontier that people are talking about and the people that are living there. But he doesn't have any money to go west. So what does he do? What?
Wait,
No.
he enlists as a like green recruit?
A what?
A green recruit?
No, that's a good guess. He does enlist the help of someone to finance him. Who would be interested in financing some guy to go to the West and take pictures? Not the president, but you're getting closer. What did you say, Lily?
Would it be the speculators or railroad companies?
Think of Washington, D.C. Who in Washington, D.C. would be interested in photographs of the West?
Life
Well, we don't have a magazine yet, but
President.
there's an organization that's been there for years and years and years that you're going to go see in a year. The Smithsonian Institution. He goes to the Smithsonian Institution and he asks them, hey, would you be interested in sponsoring me to go out west and take these photographs? And if you do, I'll make all my photographs available for you to put in your publications or on display or whatever the Smithsonian. And you know what? That was smart thinking because the Smithsonian thought that was great. And they approved it. And as soon as they gave him the money to go, he traveled out to the American West. First going to Fort Laramie. And then he traveled up to Virginia City, Montana to the gold fields. And then he ended up eventually at Fort Phil Kearny. So he goes to the Smithsonian Institute and makes a deal. Hey, I'll take these pictures. Do you think they have any pictures of the West? No? Well, they did not that time. And they wanted some. So they said, well, that's a great deal. We'll pay your way out there. You supply us with all the pictures we want to display in Washington, D.C. It was a great deal. So he travels to the west, he goes to Fort Laramie, then to Virginia City, Montana, and then back to Fort Phil Kearny. And he was always going to these military officers and requesting permission to go outside the fort so he could take photos. And they often denied him or told him no, which really they couldn't because he was a civilian, but you know, they were trying to protect him. And so even though he was denied by the officers and told it was a dumb idea, many times he found his way outside of the fort and took pictures. So as could be expected, he always was quickly denied permission to go, but he found his way out there on several occasions. Even though he had witnessed Indian ambushes on a regular basis, he still wandered out of the fort unarmed and alone to get his pictures. It was that important to him.
Like with an actual camera or like beams or?
No, they had these cameras that you kind of stuck a blanket over your, I mean, they had these
You took the
cameras.
whole thing?
Oh, yeah.
There's no other way.
Hey, this isn't cell phone time now. I can remember when I took it to DC where you actually had to have a camera and film. So, the times have changed. Now, his disregard for his own safety caught up with him on September 16th of 1866.
What day?
His disregard for his own safety finally caught up for him on September 16th, 1866. September 16th, 1866. On that date of September 16th, 1866, his dead body was discovered just a short distance from the fort. He was a man with long flowing hair. When they found him, he had none. He had been scalped. All of his long flowing hair was gone. He was laying on his face, and his back was split totally open by a tomahawk that was still lodged in his back. That's how they found him. Scalped, face down, back split wide open with the tomahawk. Now, historians figure that he didn't get killed necessarily by the tomahawk, that he was probably tortured horribly, and then when he died, that was kind of the last symbol of don't come out of the fort, by burying the tomahawk in his back and leaving. Okay, so the poor son of a gun lost his life, did not experience a good death, was more than likely tortured. And people said, well, why would they do that to a guy with a camera? Well, at this time in history, Native Americans or Plains Indians saw photography as evil. They saw it as evil. Bad medicine.
It like takes your soul.
Takes your soul away. And so he paid a heavy price for his ambition to be a photographer in the West. Sadly, Kate, my dear, what never happened? Why didn't they get the pictures? Nobody ever found any pictures that he had ever taken. Evidently, somebody had gotten rid of them. I don't know if it was somebody in the fort after his death or the Indians took it from him. I don't know what happened to his photographs, but no photographs were ever recovered from Ridgway Glover, and none ever ended up in the Smithsonian, which is really sad because historians, that would be a great thing to be able to go to the Smithsonian and say, hey kiddos, here's the pictures that Ridgway Glover took that we told. Aren't any? Never did find. All right, now we're going to get the meat and potatoes of this whole thing, and that's going to be the Fetterman Fight, parentheses, massacre. This is the meat and potatoes of the whole thing. Layton, my dear, prospective history major, the one that may come and take my job someday, and I'd love to give it to you. What is the difference between a fight and a massacre in the Indian Wars?
So a fight was like equal losses, and it was like resistance, but massacre there was just one side annihilating the other.
Well, she's half right. She's a fourth right.
Isn't it how the news portrays it, that if the Indians attacked us, it's a fight, but, or it's a massacre, but if we attack them, it's a
You're exactly right. It's who won. If the American military killed every single Indian in sight, it was a fight. But if the Native American warrior killed every soldier in sight, it's a massacre. This one is going to turn out to be the Fetterman Massacre. Okay. What's that? Oh, badly. Yeah, we'll tell you about it. Not even close. So, it's a great story. Now, think about the Indian philosophy. They are not going to attack a fortified military installation. And they want to kill these guys. Every one of them. Civilians too. Get them the heck out of there. They have no interest. What's the only way they can accomplish that?
Draw lines.
Get them out of the fort. Okay? So on June 21st of 1866, these surrounding Indians at Fort Phil Kearny developed this strategy to lure these soldiers out of Fort Phil Kearny. They do that on December 21st of 1866. It is winter. It is cold. December. No, did I say? No, December 21st. No, December 21st, 1866. The surrounding Indians at Fort Phil Kearny developed a strategy to lure soldiers out of Fort Phil Kearny. How would they do that, Kyra? How are they going to get them soldiers out of there? Where? Where are they going to cause their commotion? Not so much think. What's going on?
Would it be like the trail leading up?
Kind of. What havoc could they cause outside the fort? What's going on outside the fort? And one of the jobs of the military is to do what? No, that's kind of come up. Yeah.
They're going to attack white settlers who are headers of
Okay,
Kearny.
you're close. Not white settlers, but white
Woodchoppers.
wood cutters. They're still cutting wood. Okay, and so getting back to what Peyton said, the man that's on the lookout at Pilot's Knob looks down and he sees the woodcutters under attack by these Indians. And so he takes his flag and he signals down, however he did it, to the fort saying, hey, our wood train is under siege. Okay? And it's the job of the soldiers to protect those. So on December 21st of 1866, lookouts at Pilot's Knob signaled down to the fort that a wood train is under assault by the Indian warriors. When that signal comes, Captain William Fetterman goes to Colonel Henry Carrington and requests permission to go relieve the wood train, which means go relieve them of attack. So when the signal comes down, Captain William Fetterman approaches Colonel Carrington and he requests to lead his men against those Indian warriors that are assaulting the woodcutters. Does that make sense? And does Carrington give permission? Yes, because that's their job. They've got to protect those people. So when Carrington gives Fetterman permission to lead his men against the assault, Fetterman gathers up 83 men. 83 men under his command. And of these 83 men, 49 are infantrymen, which means what? No, infantry, yeah, walking, okay, marching soldiers. 27 on horses, which are called cavalrymen. So he's got 49 infantrymen. He's got 27 cavalrymen. 3 officers, including him and 2 others, and 4 civilians. So that's what he rounds up to go out and relieve the wood train. 83 men, 49 infantrymen, 27 cavalrymen, 3 officers on horseback, including himself, and 4 civilians. 83 men. And he's at the gates leaving Fort Phil Kearny. And he gets these orders from Colonel Carrington. I want you to write them down exactly. These are the orders that Captain William Fetterman gets directly from Colonel Carrington prior to him opening the gates of Fort Phil Kearny and taking his men out. He said, quote, relieve the wood train from Indian attack. Relieve the wood train from Indian attack. But do not pursue the enemy beyond Lodge Trail Ridge, which is on your ID sheet. So here were Carrington's exact orders to Fetterman. Relieve the wood train from Indian attack. but do not pursue the enemy beyond Lodge Trail Ridge. Relieve the wood trade from Indian attack, but do not pursue the enemy beyond Lodge Trail Ridge. He repeated those orders to Fetterman 3 times before he opened the gates and let him out. 3 times he said that to him. Relieve the wood trade from Indian attack, but do not pursue the enemy beyond Lodge Trail Ridge. He repeated that 3 times. Fetterman didn't listen very good, I don't think, because he was really a cocky son of a gun, very arrogant, and he once stated, "Give me 80 men and I will ride through the entire Sioux Nation." He once said that. Not there, but once before. "Give me 80 men and I will ride through the entire Sioux Nation." That was such a popular line. A person by the name of Shannon Smith wrote a book on this called "Give Me 80 Men." He said, "Give me 80 men and I will ride through the entire Sioux Nation." Yeah,
Then why would he need 81 for just a small amount?
83, yeah. Well, that's what he picked. Okay? Now, the time that Fetterman left Fort Phil Kearny on December 21st of 1866 was 11:15 a.m. He left the fort at 11:15 a.m. Now, to be honest with you, the full story of what happens from this point on will never be known because there will be no white survivors. Okay? So historians had to research this. And this is what we think happened. I think it's very accurate. Okay? Captain Fetterman and his men did